was never seen. The Wrestling History Channel, time in the deep. Relive the battles, the Wrestling History Channel.
From having one of the longest tag team title reigns in WWF history to stealing your car, it's Barry Dowso. How you doing today?
Steve, I am doing phenomenal. Thanks for having me on your show. I love it.
It is a pleasure to have you. As I mentioned off camera, you are a unicorn interview. I've chased you down for years, and we finally have accomplished my goals here, so I can just hang up the phone now and end it now. But no, seriously, though, it is an honor talking to you today. And, of course, Christmas is coming up, and guess what? That means we need to check out your brand new book. I read it in about a day and a half. It was outstanding. Now, people can pick this up on Amazon and other places like that, but tell me, why now? Why was the time to put out this book?
I don't know why, actually. It's funny because I'm so busy. I got so many things going on. I had a business for 14 years with a really good friend of mine, and we retired. And when I retired, I thought, I'm going to spend all my time with my son, my grandkids, and his wife, and, just have a good time. And now I'm working more than I've ever worked in my life. Bill, Axe, he calls me up every other day and says, "Hey, Barry, how about 2 weeks? You want to go out?" And I keep telling him, I just want to relax a little bit. And then he says, "Well, we'll just go out 2 weekends a month." And it ends up being 3 weekends a month and 4 weekends a month. And then we get to these shows and you start talking to the fans. And I just love it because for so many years you couldn't talk to the fans. We were the bad guys. So it was, right. So now all of a sudden we're hearing all these stories, and so many people said, "Barry, why don't you write a book? You've got so many different stories." And finally I just thought, what? I'm going to do it. Now is the time. Since I'm in this working mode of podcasts and, being out signing autographs, then I thought, well, might as well really get busy and write a book. So that's how it all started.
Wow. Was it difficult, though, leaving out some stories, especially ones that might expose people for the backstage antics that happen?
Yeah, I wanted to make it a positive book. And, right away, the guys that I was with, they said, "Hey, you got to tell some good stories, tell some bad stuff, and that's what sells." And I thought, it's not about that for me. I just want to, tell a good story. And, the hardest part is I got a million stories, and I just kind of, what was in my head at that time is the story that I told. But I didn't want to have any negative things about anybody. And to be honest with you, I love everybody. I really don't have bad stories to tell because I don't think they're worth listening to. So, you know what I mean? I just wanted to be positive.
I agree, because in this world, I used to work for a news station, and we'd have meetings about what can we keep people watching the television with, like burning buildings and sad stories. And, the story of, hey, a box of puppies was born, or a box of puppies was destroyed. Oh, that's unfortunate how the world works. So I'm very happy inside your book, you shared a lot of positive stories. And one of them I want to bring up right now was you and Axe are running rampant. You're all over the world. You're traveling around. You even tell Vince McMahon, "Hey, man, I need a break. I am tired. I need some time off." And he flips it around on you and is like, "Well, how about, I bring your wife to where you are in Italy, and you get to have kind of a honeymoon that you weren't able to have originally." Now, everyone always loves to promote bad stories about Vince McMahon, but positive stories are out there as well. Now, tell me why you put that in the book, and how important was it for you? Because did this happen to everybody? Was everyone getting these Vince McMahon lovely moments?
I don't think not everybody was, but I was on the road for a long time, and I never did have a honeymoon or anything. And I love my wife, and we had my son, and my son was real young. So it was real hard to be on the road and not see my son or to see my wife. And Vince knew how long we were on the road. In fact, we did a lot more stuff than a lot of other people because we were the champions. So a lot of guys got to go home, and then we'd be in other towns. So we were gone a little bit longer than other people. And when he called and said, "Hey, we'll fly your wife in, why don't you just stay out there in Italy and you just have a good time and it's on me." It was like it was unbelievable. And he did that for 3 or 4 of the guys. And we had the time of our life. You know, my wife was at home doing the housework and managing the house, and all of a sudden she gets to go to Rome, Italy. I mean, it was a big deal. And, you know, Vince was the boss. And I always looked at the business where he's the boss, I'm the employee, and what he says goes. But you could talk to him, and hopefully if it was something that you didn't like, that maybe you could change his mind or whatever. But his was the final say. And I understood that, and Bill understood that too. So Vince was I thought was a very good guy, never did me wrong. Until when I was the Repo Man, he wasn't going to change me babyface, and that was kind of what we were going to do. You know, that was what it was going to end up being. Other than that, he's always done what he said, and he was always good to me.
That's great to hear, because I've interviewed other wrestlers like Ken Patera, where when Ken Patera went to prison, Vince McMahon paid Ken Patera while in prison for his wife and his child and their mortgage each month, money. And so many other stories like that have popped up over the years, but people, as you mentioned, focus on the negative versus the positive of someone in their lives. And you know, one of the stories as well is you were asking for a certain amount of money in different territories. Well, at one point, they kind of changed the match on you. You don't get paid the same amount of money. Well, guess what? You have bills to pay. The lights have to stay on, and you leave. 2 weeks later, Vince McMahon calls you on the telephone and like, come on down, Barry. How important was that to you for not just a wrestler, but as a man, as a person, realizing your worth?
Well, and you're talking about Charlotte, North Carolina with Jimmy Crockett. And at that time, you know, I was partners with Ivan and Nikita Koloff, and it was the greatest territory. I mean, all the guys were phenomenal. Didn't matter who you wrestled. You had good matches with everybody, and everybody got along really well. And I never wanted to leave there. But I've always learned that, you know, when a promoter tells you something and doesn't do it, and especially, you know, you're there because you want to make money, that it's time to leave when they don't, you know, when they cheat you out of the money. Because if you don't leave, then they know they can do that to you all the time. Mm-hmm. So I thought that, you know, my worth was a lot more than what he thought it was. And I found out how many friends I had after I did quit there. You know, Earl Hebner, David Hebner, Steamboat, Arn Anderson, all these guys were incredible to me. And they helped me get up, you know, to the WWF and talk to Vince. And I never thought that I would get in there that fast. You know, I thought I'd have to work a little bit. You know, I thought maybe I'd have to go to Japan or, you know, go to another territory. But because of my friendship with those guys and getting me in to talk to Vince, that gave me the opportunity to talk to him. And it was amazing. That was just a few weeks after I quit, boom, I get a job again. And, you know, one of the first things I told Vince, you know, I wanted the job because he showed me exactly, you know, what I was going to be doing. Mm-hmm. And he said to me, he says, well, it all depends upon Bill Eadie. If Bill Eadie accepts you as his partner, then you got a job up here. And I said, well, what happens if he doesn't accept me for a job here? He goes, I'm going to find something for you. And I think just meeting with him face to face, talking to him, and he knew from all the people I knew, he talked to different friends of mine and everything that worked for them, that I had a good rapport. And, you know, he wanted to hire me anyways. And it was an incredible feeling knowing that the one thing I wanted in life was to be a professional wrestler. I could still go on with it. So it was a great feeling. And Vince was great. He was incredible.
So then over the years, it was always strange because you see highlight videos of big moments of, say, Hogan body slamming Andre or things of that nature. But Demolition was always seemed to be missing from those highlight videos. Now, Demolition, if nobody knows, third longest reigning tag team champions in the history of the WWF. Only the New Day and the Usos are higher up on the card on numbers. Now, why do you think for years you and Axe weren't in these highlight videos? Why are you not promoted as the history of the WWF?
You know, I really don't know that reason. You know, I always had a good rapport, and you know, I came back and did a couple of things as the Repo Man and had a couple of, you know, action figures and things. Yep. But for some reason they just didn't have us on TV. And I think probably because we never signed a Legends contract with them at the time. And they really have to own your rights and your name to be getting you on the TV. And we never had that with them. So I think they just kind of leave you off and let you do your thing. And, now that we signed a Legends contract with them, I think they're going to start doing a few things with us. We got another action figure coming out. And when I signed the contract, they wanted to do a book of me, and they wanted to do a few other things, but I told them that I already had that in the works.
Yeah.
And the people I'm working with, it goes back to Crockett. Crockett told me what he was going to do and didn't do it, so I quit. Well, I didn't want to do that to the guys that I started this book with and just go, you know what, I got to go with the WWE because they're the biggest thing in the world. I'll sell 2 million books, and
Right.
You get rich and everything. That's not what it's about. It's about your word and what you're going to do. And I try to do good by people that that are good with me. And that's why I never did the book with the WWE. I did it with these guys. And that was kind of what was in the contract. The things I'm already doing with people, I want to stick to it because I've already given my word.
Of course. Now with your book though out now, why was it just a you book? Like obviously there are demolition stories, but it's more focused on you than it is demolition. Like, was there a discussion of a demolition book, or you were always focused on, well, I have the time now, let's do it for me?
No, Bill, he did his own book with the Masked Superstar, which is a phenomenal book, and I hope everybody goes and buys it. And we talked about it, and I said, well, I'm going to do a book on Barry Darsow. And, when I was growing up through high school and all the other wrestlers that I broke into business with and how many of that are from Minnesota, I wanted to talk about
crazy.
that. And that was different than the demolition. So Bill and I, we've really been talking seriously. We're going to probably start a demolition book in January.
Wow.
And you're only the second person I've told that to. So hush, hush on that.
yeah, hush, hush. I'll just delete.
Don't tell anybody. No,
I won't.
But we're really trying to figure out how we can do the book so everybody will enjoy it. There's stories and this and that, but we want to have some real good stories about guys we wrestled and, in the ring stuff and out of the ring in the dressing room, on the road trips that we've made as Axe and Smash and Mr. Fuji and, just that kind of stuff. So that book is coming out, but, it's probably going to take a year for us to finish it. So, but it's starting probably in January.
Oh man, well, I can't wait for that book because I read yours and I was amazed by the beginning to the end of just your journey because you mentioned your child Dakota. I have 3 children. One of them also is named Dakota. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, we got something. Wow. We got something in common here. That and face paint sometimes.
And then the foreword that's in this book. Bill wrote that foreword. He's the greatest guy in the world. I love him. He's did you like that foreword?
I love, again, the stories in this book were just something I think a lot of fans needed from Demolition because over the years we've been wondering, why is Demolition not on television? Why don't we see highlight videos? And recently we have, after this Legend contract, suddenly you'd see a moment of you and, Axe defeating Andre and Haku at WrestleMania and everyone's going wild. And to me, that was really important for not just wrestling fans, but I think for you as well, because you and Demolition have created core memories for so many different people over the years. And yet you as fans had to hold on to those moments because the WWF wasn't going to promote them. Us fans would go around and share stories of Demolition and watch DVDs or VHS tapes of your clashes. So yes, of course I enjoyed what Bill wrote for you, but inside the book, I hope everyone knows that there's so many stories that people want to hear. They're going to get to hear from you, from your perspective as well. And, I think everyone still is waiting. When the hell is Demolition going to go in the Hall of Fame?
Oh, Steve, I don't know. We get asked that. I'm serious. I bet, at some of these shows, there might be 100 people that are in line. And I bet out of the 100, probably 20 or 30 of them are asking that same question. And, who knows what the thoughts are with the office up there. But, now that we're kind of in there a little bit, you never know if it's going to happen or not. And I mean, it'd be a great honor to be inducted in there, but there's so many great tag teams, and we were so lucky to be able to work with them. And over the years, even though we weren't on TV or seeing stuff about us, the guys were always talking about us because we're friends with them and we see them on the road and everything. So, you never know what's going to happen. But, last year, Bill and I, we were at the Hall of Fame. They asked us to go there, and we sat next to the Warlord and Barbarian and had a great time. And, it was pretty neat, getting invited to do something with them over all the years. All of a sudden we're invited and we're there, and we got to talk to a lot of the guys, and we had a good time there. The only problem was it was in the middle of the night, and
I was there. Yes.
I mean, by the time we got out of there, it was probably 4 a.m. our time now, Yeah. So, and then we had signings the next morning. So it was tough.
Yes. It was, if no one was there, it was lasted until about 2:30, 3 a.m. And then after that, I had to go to the WWE World personally, because I was doing media. So there I am with Sean Mooney doing stuff with him because he had a WrestleMania 9 panel. And yeah, it was a lot of caffeine. A lot of caffeine that day to keep going, but that's awesome to hear that all the fans are still coming out and obviously enjoying your stories. But one of the biggest stories, I think, is you working with Andre the Giant, because Andre the Giant worked with, say, Hogan and Warrior and Savage, and getting to work with him, especially around this time, must have been very important for you as a performer, because he is the boss.
He is the boss. And a lot of people don't know, but he was just the nicest guy in the world. If you were friends with him, he was incredible. And it was sometimes hard to get him out of his bubble. He had this persona, he'd sit and play cards, and, a lot of people would come in and they'd be scared to even talk to him. But once you talk to him, and he knew that you were talking to him because you were friends with him and not just using him or, I mean, then he would open up to you, and he was great. And, before I even wrestled him, I used to play cribbage with him in the locker room all the time, and we'd laugh. And then finally, when the angle happened, it was like, oh, this is great. And it wasn't because it was Andre the Giant necessarily. He was a friend of mine. And I loved working with my friends more than anything. But getting in the ring with probably the most, recognizable person ever in wrestling, and one of the top guys. I mean, it was a huge thing, and we had a lot of fun in the ring too.
Yeah, there's some amazing moments at WrestleMania and then Royal Rumble as well. It's just fun to see because, Andre only worked with certain singles wrestlers, Jake Snake Roberts as well. But when he's suddenly in a tag team, gets to work with Demolition, and, Demolition is the top tier of tag teams at that point in time. And one of the ribs in your book, though, really shocked me, because one of the most popular Royal Rumble moments is Axe and Smash coming out as number 1 and number 2 in the Royal Rumble. I'm thinking to myself, well, before I read this book, that this was just a brilliant idea of, whoa, every man for himself. It turns out it's a rib on both of you. How did you feel walking out realizing, you sons of bitches?
Well, it shocked the heck out of me, because, we're in the back, and, they tell you what number you're going out and this and that. And for the longest time, we kept saying, when are we going out? And they never said anything to us. So we couldn't figure it out. And then somebody came and said, well, Axe, you're going to go out first. And I was laughing. I go, you're going out first. You're going to probably be out there for, 45 minutes or something. And in a match like that, you really don't want to be out there too long, because the chances of, somebody, when there's 10 guys in a ring and they might hit your knee and you might blow a knee out or something. So, you kind of want to get in and out of there unless you got an angle going with somebody. So his music plays, and, he goes out there, and all of a sudden they tell me, Smash, get ready. And I go, what do you mean get ready? And all of a sudden my music starts, Bill was in the ring thinking they made a mistake, so he's kind of laughing his head. And I'm thinking, holy shit, now I got to go out second. So now I'm wondering, what are we going to do? Am I going to go out there and fight him? Or am I going to, go out there and, put my arm around him and say, hey, we're out here. But, you're thinking, well, you don't want this to be boring.
Right.
So the office is really wondering what we are going to do, So we just thought, well, let's start nailing each other and hitting each other. So it was a hell of a rib. And then we didn't know that Andre was coming out next.
Yeah.
So that was kind of, where Vince and Pat Patterson were so smart. They would foreshadow things that were going on later on in, a month or 2 or 3 months later down the road. And having Andre come in and us two getting on him, that was all part of, the angles that were going on after. You know what I mean? And now you can see what they're doing, in your head and figuring out why. But we laughed, and I remember we were in there, and Bill and I both looked at each other, and we said, "Thank God this freaking Giant's coming in here. You're killing me," And we started laughing in the ring because we were hitting each other pretty good, And when Andre came in, the first thing Andre came in, he comes through the ropes. He goes, "Oh boy," it's like now I got both of these guys coming on. It was good. I just loved Andre.
That is amazing to hear. Yeah, it is one of the highlights of Royal Rumble history. There's so many great moments, but that is one of those that always jumps out. So when I read that in your book, I was like, oh man, I really need to talk to Barry about this, because a rib that turned into one of the top 10 moments in Royal Rumble history. So jokes on Vince and Pat.
Yeah, what's really hard though about when you're writing a book is, you have that story, but you can't tell the whole story, because otherwise that would be the book,
Right.
So you have to narrow things down, about what was really written and try to get the best parts of that story. But there's so much involved in every one of those stories in the book that, I could go on and on, I don't know if you like the one about Ernie Ladd,
Oh yeah.
The guy, he's 6'8", this monster guy, and I would sit next to him and I'd look at him and I would just laugh because he was so funny, his jokes and, everything. And just, what do you say about Ernie the Cat Ladd,
One of the best.
I hung around with some of the greatest guys in this business, and I loved them all.
Well, like when in your book, you mentioned some of your friends that are close by, Rick Rude and things of that nature. Like, who were some of your best friends? Because in wrestling, I've heard the story where if you can count your friends on one hand, then you've done a good job in the business. Like, how many friends were you rolling with that actually you considered real friends, not just, hey, we work together?
God, there's so many of them. Rick Rude, Kurt Hennig, Joe and Mike, the Road Warriors. Best friends with all these guys: Brady Boone, Wayne Bloom, Brad Ringens, Arn Anderson, Ivan Koloff, Nikita Koloff. I could just keep going.
Get two hands going, yeah.
And these were the guys, Cowboy Ron Bass, Tito Santana. I was with these guys all the time. And it just, looking back at that, I wish I could be with them all the time, and it was, the worst thing is, Rick Rude, when he passed away, his family would just love to, it's just, and Kurt Hennig, his grandkids and everything, if they could just see Kurt, that's the worst part of this thing. Their families never got to really see what they were like, because, now they were old enough and then they passed away. And this is the greatest time of my life, being with my grandkids. And I just look at these guys, how young they were when they passed away. It's just terrible.
One of the themes of your book, I definitely realized, was you're a family man. And from hearing the stories of being away from your wife and child on the road, the sacrifices of being who you are and what you've done, how challenging is that to balance? Because at one point you're making all this money, you're sending it back to your family. They're living this luxurious life, but you're on the road away from them. How challenging is that mentally to be away for that long?
Oh, it was really, really a challenge, but I got the greatest wife. I mean, she took care of the family. Whenever something wasn't right at home, she never called me up and said, Barry, you wouldn't believe what's going on. I got to have help doing this. She would always keep that from me because she knew when I was on the road, I had to think of, wrestling and what I do on the road. And if I would have been worried about that, it would have ruined my trips away from home,
Yeah.
So when I got home, everything was incredible. And, we kind of laugh about it now, even. It's like, she says, well, Barry, when are you going to get on the road again? I need to get on with my life. I'd be gone for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, or whatever. I come home for 3 or 4 days, and I messed up her whole system,
Yeah.
And, sometimes I'd leave and I'd be kicking my feet up in the air going, yeah, I get to go back on the road with my friends, and she's probably doing the same thing at home. Thank God he's out of the house, but the hardest part of all, but I guess, was back then you wouldn't have cell phones or anything.
Right. FaceTime.
And I made sure I called every single day. When my son got a little older, I talked to him and talked to her every day. And the phone bills got pretty high back then. But that's something that you had to do. They were number one.
That's awesome to hear because, there's so many. I always wonder about the sacrifices of being a celebrity. You were and still are. But when you travel around the world, your children and your wife are watching you on television, but yet you're not home. Like, why isn't Daddy home? Like, well, because Daddy's working. And from your book, I really got, it wasn't just demolition stories. It was, hey, I'm a father, I'm a husband. And those are great stories to read as well. But one of the biggest.
Don't get me wrong, though. When I got on the road, I did have a good time, too.
Well, I didn't say you didn't, Barry.
it wasn't all, hey, let's go back to the hotel and go to bed. And, you got with your friends from back home and everywhere, and you have a few beers and you go out to the bars and, you
have a good time.
You had to have a good time because that was, some of your stress, that was part of it. It wasn't work all the time. So I can't say that,
You can't say just we're a family, man. You were saying you're having a good time out there with the boys.
Right. You had to. Otherwise, you'd lose your mind.
Probably. You're right. And one of the questions I think you probably always will get, and I need to have your answer as well, because in your book, there's a big portion about Legion of Doom. And what you said in your book was very interesting because you bring up, well, Demolition has to turn heel for the Legion of Doom to come in as baby faces to work against you because this is going to be a great program. But for years, upon decades, upon probably centuries, the comparison of Demolition and Legion of Doom will always be brought up. But lately, the Powers of Pain have been put in the cycle of, are the Powers of Pain the Vince McMahon version of the Road Warriors, or is it Demolition? For you personally, do you believe Demolition is a creation to create Vince McMahon's own Road Warriors, or is Demolition its own separate thing?
Well, it's funny because I never ever thought of that. Not one time. And now I hear it all the time, and now I look back and Bill has told me too. He said, we were kind of created from the Road Warrior movie, Humongous or whatever, and I never really watched it.
Yeah, Mad Max.
Yeah, Mad Max or whatever it was. So I guess Vince and Bill and Randy Colley did kind of create that up there. But, I never ever even pictured that because we worked completely different. We looked different but similar. Almost like every other wrestler. It's like, somebody slams somebody. Does that mean that you can't slam that person? Otherwise, you're exactly like them. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or, so the way we worked and the way they worked, we were two completely different people. That's kind of how I looked at it. And when the Powers of Pain came in, it was like, well, they were different too than us or different than the Road Warriors. And, I suppose it's just a good conversation for people to say, oh yeah, they're just like, the Road Warriors or Road Warrior ripoffs, or the Road Warriors are Demolition ripoffs, or, you know what I mean? And it just creates news, I guess. But, we were all similar, so I don't know what to say about it.
No. Yeah.
I just know when they came in, I thought they put that whole angle together wrong. They just put us together, and I thought they could have got a lot more out of it if they would have kept us apart, and we would have remained baby faces. They would have remained baby faces, and then eventually one of us would have changed, and then we could have won each other, and then it would have been one heck of a deal. But the matches were really tough with those guys, and we didn't have tough matches with pretty much anybody, but for some reason we just all clashed, you know.
Same styles, maybe?
Well, yeah and no, but, you know, because we worked with everybody. We worked with smaller guys, bigger guys, everybody. It was just, you know, it was just hard. And, you know, you go by what a lot of the people are doing, and the people didn't know quite what to do because, you know, we're all of a sudden baby faces, and then these guys come in, and then they changed us. They put masks on us at one time. They, you know, did all this different things, and we were no longer that Demolition team, you know. And that's what. And then, you know, everybody's got egos, you know, so that's kind of part of it too. You know, here all of a sudden you're champions and longest reigning and this and that, and now all of a sudden you're putting new guys over that's coming over. Well, you want to have good matches with them when you put them over, and you want to stay strong. Well, it just never happened, you know.
I'm glad you brought that up, because in your book, you bring up how Vince McMahon brought you in to a meeting and was kind of describing how it's going to happen next. But with Demolition being baby faces, you mentioned also in your book about action figures, Hasbro's. You heard stories about LGNs and how much people were making. Well, now you're a major baby face. Your action figures are coming out. But now you're heels. If I'm little Timmy and little Sarah and I'm telling my mommy and daddy to buy me action figures, am I going to pick the bad guys or the good guys? And I think for you, how does that feel knowing that just turning heel or babyface is one thing, losing out on merchandising because Vince is trying to get another team over by having them beat you? How does that feel against your wallet?
Well, you know, and like I said, Vince is the boss, and you got to do what he asks for, and it's disappointing, but that wasn't such a big thing. It was rushing the whole thing, and then a lot was happening too. You know, Bill got sick,
of course,
and then Bill was going to get a job with the office, and then Brian came in. So, you know, a lot was happening in that time, and you know, it was more to me with this. The disappointing part was the way they worked it. They put it all together too fast and rushed it. Because I never mind, you know, or Bill never minded doing jobs for anybody, but there's ways of doing it and ways of not doing it. And the way these matches were put together, it was like they're getting they wanted these guys over big at our expense, and they didn't get over big. And I think it really hurt them too. And I talked about it with Animal a lot. And he says, yeah, you know, he came in and was all excited because now they're gonna beat the Demolition, and you know, they're the top tag. But after he's seen what was happening, then it was like, well, yeah, we didn't get over because you're not beating that team anymore.
No,
you know, and that's the whole thing about wrestling. You can go in there and you could eat somebody up and everything, but you didn't get better. You're, you know, to the people, oh, he's a tough guy, but you need to work with the people, and you need to beat somebody that means something to get you up to the next level. And that's what the Road Warriors didn't do at that time, you know? So that's what was disappointing about that situation, I thought. I mean, and, you know, my view might be different than Bill's or Vince's or, you know, whoever else's.
Of course. One of the things too was, for at least personally for me, was there was no pay-per-view match payoff. There was no let's build to WrestleMania. You were attached to Power and Glory. Power was a pain for a while on pay-per-views, but Demolition and Legion of Doom only fought on, say, multi-man matches at Survivor Series or multi-man matches on Saturday Night's Main Event. There was never this big LOD Demolition blow-off. And you're right. Suddenly they added Crush into the mix because of Axe's illness, but they also added those, I'll just say them, gimp masks on your face to, I don't know, take away some magic you had as with your face paint. Like, how did you feel about those masks? Because it felt like they were trying to cut your legs out from underneath you without really telling you.
I wore them a couple of times, and I went to Vince and said, Vince, I can't wear this mask. I won't wear this mask anymore. It was ridiculous. I it didn't feel good. And then we ended up taking the masks off. And that probably, when I did that, that probably was a bad thing. Vince is probably going, well, I can't believe he's not listening to me. He doesn't want to do this, you know? Well, you know, screw those guys, you know, who knows? But, you know, it was kind of the end of the Demolition when all this was happening. And, you know, you can see it. So you just kind of go with it and start planning your future, you know? I mean, but like I've always said, Vince was the boss, and you listen to the boss. And if you don't like it, you tell him. And if you don't like that, you go.
Well, there's a match. There's a match though with Demolition, and it's the greatest Survivor Series match of all time because everyone except for 2 people in the match don't have face paint. It's Demolition, all 3 members with Mr. Perfect taking on Ultimate Warrior, Texas Tornado, and Legion of Doom. This is Axe's last official match, and his hair looks amazing. If he's never heard that story, his hair looks amazing that night. But yet, that night is the end of Axe. For you, emotionally, what's it feel like walking out there one last time with your partner? Because this is the end of, again, a historic run as Axe and Smash of Demolition.
It was terrible. I mean, it was, you know, Brian and I went on a little longer, but, you know, I knew that wasn't going to work. And, you know, I never wanted a job where I just went out there and went through the motions and not been part of something. I never liked that. And like I said, I didn't mind doing jobs or anything like putting people over, but I always wanted a reason for it. And I knew once Bill left, Brian and I weren't going to continue as the Demolition and get a push at that. It just wasn't going to happen because it's just not the same as Axe and Smash as Smash and Crush. And Crush was a great guy, good worker, everything, but you never can replace the main guy, you know, one of the main guys in the deal. So it was really hard to, you know, not be around Bill anymore and have him there. So that was a tough deal.
They gave you Mr. Fuji as well again to really emphasize that you were a bad guy again. And Mr. Fuji, though, I've heard some horrible ribs from him that sound illegal. But for you, were you ever ribbed by Mr. Fuji?
I was a little bit, you know, but you know, nothing serious because
okay.
We were his bread and butter, you know, so they had to be, you know, ribs that weren't too terrible like there were on some other people. But I remember, you know, I don't sleep very well, and I still don't. I get 3-4 hours of sleep at night. I'm, you know, constantly going. And we were in Europe one time, and you know, you go to the gym, you train right, you do everything. And so I checked into the hotel, and Fuji heard my room number, and Fuji knew how tired and exhausted I was. So he gave the person a wake up call. So he went to bed like at midnight. He had wake up calls like at 1 a.m, 2 a.m, 3 a.m, 4 a.m. And I knew right, you know, at 1 o'clock, you think, you know, you answer the phone, nobody's there. You think, oh, somebody got the wrong number. And you just get back to sleep. Boom, the phone would ring again. Now it's 2 o'clock. Now it's like, who the hell is doing that? You know. Then you hang up and you go, well, nobody could do this again. 3 o'clock in the morning. Now it's like, now you can't sleep. So you're up all night. And then I'm thinking, that damn Fuji was right behind me when I checked in. I know he's ribbing me. So the next morning we get on the bus, and I think he's waiting for me to say something. I never put it over at all. And later on, I did exactly the same thing to Fuji. But I did it where it was only one phone call. And then about a month later, I did it again. Then about 3 months later, I did it again. And I spread it over time. And I never said a word, and he never said a word. And he knew I got him back. But maybe that was the respect that I got from him then, you know. Don't rib
the long con of ribs on Fuji.
The long con, yeah.
I love it. That's amazing. Again, I've heard some crazy stories from Fuji. That's a light one. Like you gave me a very G version of Fuji stories that I've heard when I'm like, oh, if this was out there, then this would have been a problem legally.
I tell you, Fuji was great. You know,
if he liked you, it sounds like.
You know, he was Bill, Fuji, and myself. We traveled every day together, and Fuji helped us out a lot from the stuff that we did in the ring. But it's kind of funny because you'd get a stack of tickets, you know, like this thick at TV, and it'd be enough tickets, you know, airline tickets for 3 weeks. So I would take, and I'd make the reservations for the cars at all the places we'd go.
Mm-hmm.
Then Bill would make all the reservations for the hotels. And then we'd say, Fuji, what do you got? He goes, well, there's a Chinese restaurant here. There's one here. He had all the food places all over the world. He had them down pat. So we went to the best restaurants, best everything, but that was Fuji's job. And we laughed because you know it was Chinese food or sushi. That's what we ate all the time on the road.
Man, it's not, again, it sounds like you're on the good side of Fuji.
I was on the good side of Fuji, yeah.
Versus other situations. You know, there's a few more stories I want to bring up in your book that you didn't really emphasize as much as I thought. One of them is Survivor Series 1989, where you're teaming up with Hulk Hogan and Jake the Snake Roberts. And Hogan has this idea, this is according to Jake. Hogan has this great idea of like, we should all carry this giant snake out together. Like, oh, we'll come out there. Everyone will love it. Well, Jake the Snake doesn't like that as idea because he believed that's stealing from his shine. The snake is his thing. So Jake, according to the rumors, gets a snake guy that says, bring me the biggest, nastiest snake you have. And you are here in this situation and you see this thing. How large actually is this snake? Because it sounds horrific.
Now, did you talk to Jake too?
Yes.
So he talked about it too, right?
Yeah, he wasn't very happy with Hogan about anything involving that snake that night.
Well, it's funny because we get into the, you know, Jake always had a snake in the shower room because it was away from everything. And it was a little warmer in there, you know. So Hogan, myself, and Bill and Jake says, I got this great snake back here. It's going to be fantastic. It'll be a good one to bring to the ring. And Hogan says, well, let's go look at this thing. So we all walk in there, and this freaking snake, no exaggeration, had to be 20 feet long. I mean, it was a monster. And the head on it was this, and probably this long and this big around. I mean, it was huge. And Jake was all excited. He goes, yeah, we're going to get this to the ring. And, you know, this is a big show. We're going to make this happen. And I said, and I'll, you know, my memory sometimes isn't very good, but this is the Rosemont Horizon, and the fans there are nuts in Chicago. So we go over to grab the snake, and I'm not exaggerating. Jake gets the head, and Hulk's like in the middle. I'm back by the tail, and this thing is throwing us around in the shower, going crazy. And we set this snake down, and Hulk goes, there ain't a chance for bringing this thing out there, because if we lose it, it's going to go in the crowd, and it's going to hurt somebody. Or it's going to hurt us. You know? Jake's kind of laughing. And he goes, come on, we can do this, you know. And we're all looking like Jake's crazy, you know. And he says, no, it'll be no problem. I'll handle this snake. And right away, Hulk goes, no, we're not doing this. So then there was a smaller snake that was probably, you know, 14 feet, which was still a monster snake, bigger than any snake that he had out there. Now, this one's probably this big around by the head. And we grabbed that thing, and that thing was wanting to move around too. And I think what happened, I think the Bulldogs probably ran some hot water on it or something to get it going crazy. You know, that's probably what they did to the other one too. So we ended up taking that out to the ring and everything, and it was no problem. But that first snake, it was a monster. Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it's all good. It's the snake. It's the snake handler calling, being like, "Listen, stop telling that story."
Don't tell that story. But then I heard, and I don't know if it was a rumor or not, but that snake got out and went up into the rafters of the Rosemont Horizon, and I don't know if it was that snake or another one that was at another show or whatever. But I heard that about 4 or 5 days later, the janitor was up there climbing up there doing something. Boom, there's this snake. I think he about had a heart attack. You know? So I don't know if it was that snake or it was at a different place.
It's another snake. There's multiple snakes stuck in the Rosemont Horizon.
Yeah.
Oh my, no. I see, I've heard portions and different versions. That's why when I got into your book of that part, I was like, yes. And then you shared exactly. But yeah, Jake pretty much shared that he purposely got an angry giant snake to piss off Hulk Hogan because he didn't like the fact that Hogan wanted to also hold his snake. But, it's still it's a dream team. When you look at the picture of like Survivor Series is coming up, when you see that picture, it's Demolition, Jake the Snake holding a snake, and Hulk Hogan, dude. Like that's the dream of any child with action figures, to put together a team. That is it. What was it like though, working with Hulk Hogan, especially now, because at that point, the height of his career is at that point.
Oh, it was fantastic. Hulk was a great guy, and he was away from a lot of the guys a lot of time, but he'd come in and he'd talk to his friends and everything, and I got along with him fantastic. But when the match first started, it's Jake who's one of the top guys, and Hulk is the top guy, and we're the top tag team.
Yeah.
And you kind of wonder, in interviews, are they going to let you talk, or is Hulk going to take it all, or is Jake going to take it all? We all had our space, and that was really good of them. And it was good of us to let them do it too, but it was all an equal thing. And I really respected Jake and Hulk for that. And I know Bill did too. And it was probably the biggest thing at that time for the Demolition to be teamed up with those guys at that time. So that's when you kind of knew, hey, we're the top guys. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it was a good feeling.
Oh yeah, it's one of those moments when you see the poster of all of you together. It's just, and you're fighting Zeus, $1 Million Man, and Powers of Pain. So it's like you have all the top bad guys on one side, all the top good guys on the other. It's brilliant to watch, and it's so great to hear about that snake story. When I got to that part of that book, I was like, yes. I wanted to confirm that you were also there, because sometimes when Jake would tell that story to some people, or even me, he never mentions Demolition is there. He's like, yeah, Hogan's there, and I'm trying to scare him with this giant snake. I'm like, oh my god, dude! Like this thing could have eaten Hogan. Like don't do that.
Well, what's unbelievable is when you grab the snake, it actually moved you around. And there's 4 of us holding this snake. That's how powerful this thing is.
And I say you're 4 giant guys too. It's not like you're just wimpy small dudes holding this 20-foot anaconda. It sounds like. And
those snakes too. Their whole thing is they wrap around you and they squish you. Oh
yeah.
And that one could kill you. I mean, that's how big it was. Even the smaller one would, but this one definitely. If it got around you, you could not get that snake off of you.
Oh my God, that's an amazing story. Now, for so long, everyone always talks about the GOATs of professional wrestling, Hogan or Bret Hart. For you, who is like the greatest tag team besides Demolition that you believe is the greatest tag team of all time?
God, that's so hard. I tell you, people always ask, who's the greatest wrestler of all time? Who is this? Who is the best tag team?
Yeah.
There's so many of them, and each one of the tag teams had their own little thing that they were better than somebody else with. The Hart Foundation was phenomenal. And a lot of that was, Jim was the strong man of the team. Bret was the worker bee of the team. So it was a great mixture of guys. The Brain Busters, they made you work so hard that they got the best out of you. The Bulldogs were, that's a hard question. There's so many guys, the Strike Force, Earthquake and Tugboat.
Oh, I love natural disasters.
One of the funnest tag teams to be with was the Boss Man and Akeem when they were together.
Oh, Twin Towers.
They were so much fun in the ring and great guys. And so that's what I'm saying. I don't know who that would be on that list. We were very lucky to be the guys with the titles and, have them for so long, because any one of those teams could have had the titles for a long period of time. So we were very blessed.
Yeah. Again, Demolition, top tag team of all time. But when Demolition is done, Repo Man appears. And I'll tell you what, in your book, you mentioned it, and I'm glad you did. I personally did not notice that Repo Man was Smash. Had no idea until, years would go by. Was that always a conscious thing for you? Like, I need to not look like Smash here.
Yeah. When I first started, and that was one of the things that Vince kind of was talking about, how are you going to be the Repo Man? You know, you're Smash. And I said, well, I'm going to drop weight. I'm going to look a little different. I'm going to work differently. And that's what I did. I was, 320 as Smash, and I got down to about 265 as the Repo Man.
Wow.
So I completely changed my body and the way I acted, the way everything. And, there was a few hardcore wrestling fans out there that, they say they knew it right away. I don't know if they did, but after a while they probably knew. But, most of the people didn't know that I was Smash. And it was fun. I really enjoyed being the Repo Man. And, it was acting is what I did. And I tell a lot of people that the worst gimmick I ever had was Barry Darsow. I could never play Barry Darsow. I always had to have a gimmick, and then I could be that wrestler,
Oh yeah, it's again Repo Man when you run out and you're looking around like you're doing something wrong and you're laughing and your giant tow rope. There's a moment though where you wrapped your tow rope around the British Bulldog's neck and you threw him over the top rope and you hung him. And now where I lived, this aired at 10 o'clock in the morning on Saturdays. So when you're seeing Repo Man almost, kill the British Bulldog in front of your eyes as a small child, was there any pushback? Because I know as years would go on, say like when Jake had the King Cobra and it's fighting Macho Man, there was pushback from advertisers. You're hanging a man. Anyone come up to you and go, all right, we can't show that and we can never do that again?
No, I don't remember anything like that, but they didn't let me do it after a while, because I wanted to do it to everybody, but, and then eventually they do it to me, but yeah. It ended up stopping, I think, after that. So it probably was a little bit of pushback, when they'd come up with the finish, it was never, put the rope around his neck and hang him anymore,
Probably a good idea.
But it was great. It got heat.
Oh no, it definitely did. I'm not saying it didn't. I'm just saying like there's only a few moments on Saturday mornings where you're expecting to see, G.I. Joe or Ninja Turtles, and then you flip through the channels and there's a masked man hanging another person. As a child, advertisers, I'm wondering like, oh well, little Timmy and little Sarah could also do this at their house. That's why the videos of do not try this at home pop up. But
well, in a funny story that wasn't so funny at the time, I was wrestling Terry Taylor in Louisiana, and I had a rope when I was Crusher Khrushchev. I had a rope, and it was a hangman's noose, and I put it around his neck, and I threw him over the top rope, and Nikolai Volkov came in, and he was holding the rope. I went underneath the bottom rope, and I was outside hitting Terry in the stomach, and Nikolai points behind me, and he says, "Knife!" And right away, I ducked, and the guy was ready to stab me, and he tried to cut the rope off of Terry Taylor when Nikolai was hanging him, and he cut Nikolai's boot, cut all the laces off his boot, and then Nikolai let up, and then the police came and grabbed the guy. But if he wouldn't have said knife, he would have got me right in the back. So that's how serious that hanging was,
Wow.
Yeah.
Now that's interesting because sometimes in today's world, people will say like, "Oh, wrestling's so fake," it's so real. Like, where do you land on that? Because it's not fake when you're being dropped on your back 300 days a year, but there is predetermined necessity to the storylines. You have to have an ending. But a man comes in with a knife because he's believing what you're doing. How do you feel about that? Like, are you proud that a man tried to come in with a knife, or are you thinking, this is not? I don't know about this.
Well, that was a little too far. But,
yeah.
Back then I was just, getting into wrestling. I probably had a year or 2 years of my wrestling career, and I was really learning with Bill Watts. And I was, when all of a sudden you turned heel and you got the fans that mad at you, you did your job. So that was kind of the start of where I really learned about the business, because I became such a heel. And it was the gimmick, Crusher Khrushchev. That was when the Russians were bad, and I'm a bad guy, and I'm an American that loved Russians and hated America already. So I was like the worst. I was the turncoat. So it was my fault why that person came and did that, but he shouldn't have done that. But I had so many close calls where I'd walk out and my windshield's broke, or the tires are flat in the car, and people wanting to fight you when you're out. And so I knew I did my job is what I did.
Yeah, but are you being paid enough money to fix your car and fix your tires at that point in time when this is happening? Like, obviously it's proud as a performer, but you're thinking like, damn, I got to buy 4 new tires again.
No, you didn't make enough money back then. There was many days where it was $25 and you're sleeping in your car and all that kind of stuff. But it was, you're a pro wrestler and you love it. And that's what it's all about, you know. But
yeah,
you knew eventually you're going to get the big paydays, and it happened. But
of course,
you never make enough.
No, I think in life, money is always the how can I get more? But sometimes you just it's not enough to fix tires and apparently, you know, almost being stabbed. So that would have been as fun as well.
And what's hard is you go to a building and there's 20,000 people there, and you know they paid, you know, $25 a ticket, and you add that up, and there's only 25 people on the card, and then you wrestle for 30 minutes, and you have the match of your lifetime. The people hate you and all this, and you get your check for $275, and it costs you $100 to get there. Then you think, well, who made all that money? You know? Well, the promoters made all that money. Right. That's why they had the nice houses and the jet planes and this and that. So you had to kind of live with what you know, you're a pro wrestler.
Yeah, I've heard so many stories of that nature, unfortunately. But, you know, in your book, though, you did bring up one of the most famous matches of all time that people talk about still to this day, King of the Road. You are fighting Dustin Rhodes, Goldust, and this amazing match. People always say it's terrible or great. I love it because it's new and it's inventive. And unfortunately, it kind of ends your WCW run at that point in time. But for you, how difficult is it to wrestle in a moving vehicle? And then you do exactly what the office tells you to do, and it gets you fired from your job. Like, for you personally, how insulting and disappointing is that when you do something that you thought you pulled it all off, but yet it turns to be the other way around?
Unbelievable. I mean, I couldn't believe it. And in that truck, it was really a tough situation because there was hay and there was manure and there was all this stuff where you couldn't hardly even walk in the truck. And then they had a couple of steel bars that came across. So, you know, you're going down the highway at 65 miles an hour, and then they'd slam on the brakes. You had to, you know, tumble and, you know, fall and doing everything. So it was really a hard match. It wasn't like you can, you know, be doing backflips and this and that in there. It was, you're fighting for your life to even make it from one end of the truck to the other. And we thought that we had a great match when it was all done with. And then at the end, you know, the next day, Eric called me up and says, Barry, I got good news and bad news. And I asked him, I said, so what's the good news? He goes, you guys had a hell of a match last night. And then what's the bad news? Well, you're fired. You know, it was just like this high, and then all of a sudden, right down. And I've talked to Eric about it, and we, you know, kind of laugh about it and everything. But he promised me that he was going to hire me back, and he did. So, you know, I really like Eric. Eric's a great guy, and he's, again, the boss. You listen to the boss. It's, you know, they run the show. But very disappointing because I thought the Blacktop Bully was going to go a long ways. You know, I thought that was going to be a top gimmick and be able to work with all the top guys. And then that was the end of my career.
Now, before we wrap this up, though, with wrestlers and wrestling fans, like, how difficult is it for you to go from people are chanting your name, finding you in airports, trying to get your autograph, things of that nature, to immediately it's just over because you brought up in your book and you're working with the Berserker, but you're not wrestlers anymore. You're working, selling cars. So for you, like, how difficult is it? I don't think people understand, from going from 20,000 people arena chanting your name to no one's looking for you, no one's asking for autographs anymore. How's that? What, like, the process? Take me through that, because I can't imagine going from rock star to selling cars.
Well, you know, to me, I mean, it was the greatest feeling in the world being in front of all those people and everything. But, you know, the most important thing to me was my family. And after all this time on the road, I'm finally with them. You know, I'm coaching hockey, coaching football, helping in baseball. I'm doing all this stuff. So I needed that break from it. And, when John and I were selling cars, I never even really thought about getting back into wrestling. And we were just sitting there one day in the office, and John just says for Rib, he says, "Hey, let's call Vince."
Yes.
I said, "John, I don't want to do it." He goes, "No, let's do it." And I said, "Okay." So we get in there, and I'm thinking to myself, well, there's no way he's going to get through to Vince.
Right.
Well, he's talking to the secretary. He's got on speakerphone. And the secretary goes, "Oh, John Norton, Barry Darcy. Yeah, I'll pipe you right in." Boom. Vince is on. Hey, what are you guys doing? We're talking, and we were laughing our heads off. And that's why I've always said Vince has always been a good guy. To me at least. So we talked about selling cars and this and that. And John goes, "Vince, I got a hell of an idea, and I want you to do it." And Vince says, "Okay, John, what is it?" And he goes, "Barry and I are going to tag up. We're going to be tag teams. We're going to come in. And we're going to be your champions." And Vince goes, "Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen today, guys." It was just like, well, Vince, it was great talking to you. Thank you. That's how the conversation went. So then the next thing he says, "Well, let's call up Eric Bischoff." Well, John wants to get back into wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
And I really didn't, and when you're talking about what was it like to be away from the fans and all this, it's, to me, it didn't, that wasn't that part of my life anymore, But when John talked to Eric, and we kind of talked separately, and then Eric says, "Well, come on up and we'll talk." And that's when we got back in again. He signed a contract, I signed a contract. And so now we were back into it again, but it was really hard for me because I didn't want to have a job just to have a job and make money. And he gave me an unbelievable contract, and I didn't even work.
Wow.
Most guys are going to go, "God, this is great." Well, I wanted to work. I wanted to be part of that machine, and I wasn't part of that machine anymore. And that's when it really hit me that I'm at my last leg. I'm not going to be, there's only two territories. There's WCW and there's Vince McMahon. We're not getting into Vince anymore, so I knew that was out of the question. And if you're not one of the top guys making money in WCW, you're just an extra guy there. And I had a hard time with that then. Then after my contract was done, I didn't mind leaving. It was great. And I never thought after all of this that now we were going out every weekend signing autographs and a book and podcasts. And it's almost like this is better than that, because I'm with my family and I take them with me sometimes and with my wife, and yet I can still go out and see the fans and do all this. So right now my life is better than it's ever been. That
is amazing.
Yeah, I wish I could live to be like 150 and
with your mind together though, right?
Yeah, and my son always says, "Dad, once you get so old and you got Alzheimer's, you don't know where you're at and you're crippled up and everything." He says, "I'm going to do the greatest thing that you've always wanted to do. I'm going to roll you out to the end of the dock, and I'm just going to let you fish out there, and I'm not going to say a word, knowing that I'm going to go overboard." And that's the end of the
Is he going to push you over? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, we laugh all the time about that, But my son's the greatest. I love him. Oh, man.
I say my dad always says if he starts losing his mind, just what to do with the pillow. I'm like, "Dad, I think they're gonna suspect that it's me immediately that took you out with a pillow." Like,
yeah,
I didn't know what your story was, but I'm like, "Oh, you're gonna fish? Oh no, he's going to push you off the edge." Oh, okay.
Or you'll roll off the dock on your own,
Yeah, one more, elbow drop, one more finisher. That's amazing to hear. And again, as I mentioned off the top, your book is out right now. I read it, and I've read so many wrestling books over the years, and your tale of Demolition and Repo Man and all of your amazing characters over the years have created core memories for me and so many other wrestlers. And one final question: when you are on these brand new adventures, your podcast, you're writing a book, you're going out every weekend to these fan fests, what's the most common thing you hear from wrestling fans?
Are Axe and Smash ever going to come back and have one last match? We hear that a lot. Or when are you going to be in the Hall of Fame? That's the other thing. And, like I say, we're never getting in the ring again, but you don't know if we're going to get asked to the Hall of Fame or not. And I just hope everybody buys the book and bring it to the shows, and I can sign it. And, I'm really excited about it, and I'm glad that you had me on your show and that you read it and you liked it and everything. So thank you for that.
Of course. No, like I said before, off camera and on camera, it is an honor and a privilege to talk to you today about your historic career. I am so happy today because, again, talking to heroes that sometimes they say, don't meet your heroes. Well, God damn it, I met one of mine today, and it was a perfect opportunity to talk about his book and his life. So thank you so much, Barry, for being here on the Wrestling History Channel. Again, I'm Steve Fall. He's Barry Dust. So check out his book and have a great day. We'll see you next time.
Thanks,
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
History Channel, where legends never sleep. The Wrestling History Channel, time in the